Good afternoon here again on Tuesday, May 5th, 2026 in House Transportation. And we have a returning visitor, Jeremy Reed from Agency Transportation, because testimony came up about damage to roads and questions from other members and committee members on road damage and overweights and whether heavy vehicles, heavy cars, heavy trucks, literally like what, is there any quantifiable way? Is it really true? And where does it really impact? And we're curious what the agency does for planning. So in the top 10 FAQs, we should come up with like, why don't we have tolling? We should just write that down so that we can hand it out. And do heavy weights and do heavier electric vehicles really ruin the roads more than a regular vehicle? We can put that down on our top 10 FAQs that members of the Transportation Committee get asked. How do I get my bridge funded? We can put that one down if we come up with what for.
Highway paved.
How do I get, yeah, just come up with the top 10 FAQs and just hand them out when people ask. But this is a response testimony as asked. So welcome back, Jeremy. Our second Group 12A guest today, witness today.
Okay, well, thank you. For the record, Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer, Agency of Transportation. So this is going to be a pretty high level conversation. There's a lot of detail and there's a lot of science within the paving world. So I'll try to keep it pretty high level. You know, there will probably be folks who be like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And it is. But for the purposes of this, I think I'll be able to demonstrate the point. So just for a starting point, to talk about how we collect data and how we score data. So you've all seen our pavement conditions, and we basically have a 0 to 100 scoring. It's called the PCI. And we collect data for ride, rut, and tracking, both structural and environmental. These are 500ths of a mile sections. Most of the network, or a lot of the networks on a 2-year collection cycle, but the NHS is on an annual collection cycle. We then take that information, and as you can see, we compile it and effectively average it, and it yields what's called the PCI, which is the Pavement Composite Index. And when we talk about good, fair, poor, and very poor, these are the numbers that we use. So a PCI 80 to 100 is considered good, 65 to 80 is fair, 40 to 65 is poor, and anything less than 40 is considered very poor. And this is a Vermont-specific assessment. Federal Highway has a different one that is just good, fair, poor. We've gone a little bit more detailed. And how we got to those scores is we actually scored a section of road and had people drive it and say, what do you think that was, good, fair, poor, or very poor? And so that's why it's not just 75 to 100, 50, 75, and so forth. So it was really what the user felt. And just as an example, good is what you would pretty much imagine. Fair, you're starting to see some distresses. There you go. So you can start seeing some distresses in the roadway, some minor cracking. Poor, you can see a little bit of rutting. It doesn't show up great in the picture, and some cracking. And then obviously very poor is not great. It's got some potholes and cracking throughout. So that's how we score roads and sort of assess the condition.
Was that funny two-way?
I know nothing. So you really can't see this, but again, try to describe what a roadway typical section looks like. And so this was off the Exit 17 project. And again, just trying to show what is the composition of our roadway so that you can understand the failure mechanisms a little bit. So in this case, roughly speaking, we've got 18 inches of sand barrow, 24 inches of sub-base dense graded subbase of densified crushed stone, and that's your either a manufactured product in this case, or it could be a gravel that could be bank run, depending again on the location of the usage. And then we've got 8.5 inches of pavement, and this is a flexible pavement. So what we call it is bituminous concrete pavement, and it's a flexible pavement. And I want that to stick with you, because there's rigid pavements, and that's basically concrete. And so if you travel out in the Midwest, Pennsylvania, they use rigid pavements a lot. In Vermont, we almost use exclusively flexible pavements, with the exception of some intersections.
Is that because of frost or? Yeah.
All of the above. So the trick with flexible pavements is they are just what they say, flexible. So with frost, expansion and contraction. So everything, generally speaking, expands when it heats up and contracts when it cools down. So if you think about a hot summer day in August, that pavement is 150 degrees, let's say. Cold January day might be 20 below. So the pavement has to have that flexibility. And then there's obviously the vertical thaw fees and things like that. And that all ties into the number of ways in which our pavements fail. And so as we talk about a flexible pavement design, we're trying to balance a lot of things. The flexibility to handle the frost heaves, the expansion and contraction, but also be rigid enough so that on that hot day, you can drive an 80,000-pound truck over it without causing any damage. If we have a pavement that's too rigid, it will handle that load, but it won't necessarily be flexible enough, and it'll crack just with a frost heave or a cold winter day. So maybe also just talk about what the composition of that is. So hot mix asphalt is, generally speaking, just asphalt. So that's black, sticky stuff. It's a byproduct of the refining process of crude oil, and sand and stone. That's all it is, generally speaking, in its most simplest form.
So there is a section of the 89 that it's like red.
So that's the color of the stone.
Okay.
So we'll talk about, as the asphalt either wears away or oxidizes, what you'll see is the stone. So a lot of our roads will start kind of a dark black, basically, and then over time turn gray.
Yeah.
That's the granite coming through as the asphalt wears away.
That mix is the hot mix asphalt, is asphalt, sand, and stone all mixed together, or is it the layers?
No, it's all mixed together. So a paving plant, they basically have a big drum, they inject all those constituents, they heat up the asphalt at a very high temperature, mix it all together, and then we replace it. And that's the asphalt's purpose, is just to glue all those sand and aggregates together.
Representative Wells?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, for this, because I was looking for further concrete proof that those fat, heavy, only electric cars are destroying America's highways.
I don't know that we'll get there, but we'll touch on that a little bit. Okay, so that's sort of a very high level, talking about kind of the composition of roadway and what it's made of. So to the question about weight. So I've got a link here, and you should have it within the packet. So this is a report that the trucking industry actually put together, and it has 3 different sort of analysis or conclusions, and that's why I like it, because it pulls it all together. Now, the one I've got referenced here is from AASHTO, which I'll consider basically a non-invested party who's just doing strictly the engineering. And the takeaway here is that for every 80,000-pound tractor trailer, it puts as much sort of force and deterioration into the roadway as 6,100 cars. Not electric cars, but cars. Now, if you go into the trucking analysis, they think that number is closer to 300 cars. And they talk about the methodology of that. I won't bore you with the details, but I think what I'm trying to express is there's a lot of variables that go into it, and you can reach almost any conclusion that you want to reach, like a lot of scientific studies that you can frame the narrative, you can make various assumptions about what is actually causing the deterioration. What I'll try to stress on in the next slide is that weight is important, but I'll be totally honest, in Vermont, it's probably not the driving factor in a lot of what we see. There are certainly places where the load imparted by the vehicles onto the pavement structure are causing it. But if you want to go back to this, very poor, that's not weight. Okay, that's other factors that we'll get into. So,
Yeah. So on the 89, well, both ways, in the right hand lane, majority of the traffic travel.
yep,
There are now exit 5 to
yep,
3 years of, there's like these indentations that are darker.
yes. So
That weight,
that's a combination of things. And so I call that rutting, which is a layman's term for it. My staff will correct me and say that's raveling. And so raveling,
Raveling,
yeah, and what that is
as in unravel.
exactly. And so what that is that's so those are thin lifts, right? And what that is basically the constituents are coming apart. And that's where you see that. So what you see with that smooth, dark black surface underneath, that's the milled surface because the surface treatment is gone at this point.
going off the top.
Yeah, and there's more than one reason of why that comes apart. Some of it can be weight, some of it can just be the abrasion of the tire traffic, of the plows. Some of it can be oxidative stress, right? So like all things, asphalt, when you leave it out, it oxidizes, gets brittle, and loses that flexible and sticky nature to bind everything together.
Only on the right lanes though.
Yep.
The left lane, both north and south, movements, couple
Yeah.
of exits.
And that's true a lot of the interstates, right? And again, there's certainly a lot more traffic on it, but it isn't strictly weight, right? Because there is that abrasion piece. There's just sort of the natural wear and tear of that. So it's not like where the weight is pushing the rut down. It's more of a surface deterioration caused by a number of things. Yeah, friction of the tires, the plows, and then just the friction of the tires. And then, yes, there is weight as a byproduct of that.
Representative Burke and then Representative Beck.
You got it for 89, right by Randolph. So potholes are really not the result of any weight, they're just sort of the.
So, yeah, so I'll try to get into that. So, yes and no. So more often than not, they start with something different. But then once you start having a hole and the tires impact that, now that is a weight exacerbated failure, not a weight caused failure. So let's just talk through these sort of failure modes a little bit. So within loading, right, it can cause cracking. So we talked about the pavement needs to be relatively flexible, but if it's too brittle and the weight can cause cracking, or if it's too brittle, a frost heave can cause cracking. Rutting, obviously, just as you would assume, if it's too flexible and you put a weight over it, then you'll get those ruttings. And then the raveling, what I discussed, which can be abrasive, it can be weight. There's a lot of reasons why pavement will ravel. And those are really sort of structural causes for pavement deterioration. On the other side, you've got environmental causes. Freeze thaw, right, as we discussed, in the summer, that pavement structure is going to expand. In the winter, it's going to contract. You'll have cracks there. Freeze thaw also we've all seen it. Winter day, we put down some salt, the road's wet. So think of all those different layers of hot mix, and even within the matrix itself. What happens when you get moisture and then it freezes that night, right? It's like a little bomb going off essentially, where you can get delamination of the hot mix. If you have enough pore pressure, you can pop aggregate out. So those freeze thaw cycles are very bad, not only for pavements, for bridges as well. And then the oxidative stress that I mentioned before, where just natural, the asphalt loses its characteristics over time, as most things do when you leave them out.
Yeah, so in the center of our town, and the road has been redone maybe 5 or 6 years ago, 116. We have really severe gravel to the point where in town, I mean, it's just filled with water. And if you're on the sidewalk and somebody goes, you're gonna get wet and you can't help it. So they're really severe, they seem, yet out of town, you don't see it at all. And we have Heinsberg sand and gravel that's bringing a lot of big, heavy trucks. And in my mind, it was like during the summer when those trucks are going really slow through town, stop and go, that, they're just sort of causing the surface to sort of get compressed or to move on a hot summer day, but I don't know.
My guess is it's less of like a downward pressure that's actually displacing it, and more the weight is like imparting almost a lateral load, pulling it apart. Okay. And that's where, there's very few definitive, that's why that happened. It started this, like the pothole conversation, right? There could have been a crack, but then you have multiple freeze thaw cycles, which pops out a piece, the size of a softball, that then starts taking impact from vehicles, that then, creates something bigger, and it just, it's off to the races at that point. And so one of the things that, I want to stress is water's the enemy. And that's why we take some care, if we go back to our typical section here, to try to have everything draining to the sides, because this whole area, this depth, we want to be as dry as possible. Because if there's not water contained in there, your frost heaves aren't going to occur, right? I mean, all a frost heave is that water expanding when it freezes, and generally that goes up. So what you see is we try to shed that water off the sides, both below the surface and at the surface. And that's important for maintaining the integrity of the subbase and the structure and the pavement. Because the other thing that can happen is when you get a crack, right? That crack inevitably fills with sand and dust and gunk, which then holds more water than our gravel and sand. The more water it holds, the more expansive it is when it freezes. So water is really the enemy here. But we're constantly fighting a bunch of variables that oftentimes contradict what the solution is for them.
You ever, I see on some gravel roads, they'll put like a cloth on it, I assume that's keep the water from going down through, or?
No, so what that is, so that's a geotextile, and what that generally does is it keeps the materials separated. So think of it like if you had, just some 1.5-inch stone, that provides your structure. And we use this under road beds all the time. Underneath it, let's just say you've got a clay, nasty stuff. Over time, without that geotextile fabric, all that stone will just go down. So what we're trying to do is just sort of spread the load out over that clay so that it doesn't just absorb into the stone doesn't just absorb into the clay. So as much as we'd like to point to one thing that causes deterioration on the roadways and in the pavements, it's normally a lot of different things that work together to break down the roadways. As we go back to that typical section, and as I said, more often than not, our failures on the majority of our roadways are not probably from loading. The reason I say that is because the majority of our 3,300 miles of roadway aren't new engineered roadways, right? They've been built up over time. And so they do see a significant heaving action. The sub bases aren't as free draining as we'd like. The sands aren't as free draining as they like. So they hold water. The underlying structure is already cracked. So you get reflective cracking up through that. You know, we'll patch it, make it look good. But at the end of the day, we haven't fixed the structure. We've improved the riding surface, but we haven't fixed the structure.
And the cost, say per mile of like putting a good solid top coat on versus, you know, like in Route 2 there for
Yep.
a couple of years, they, you know, looked like they just rebuilt the whole road.
Yep. So ballpark, a preservation treatment, let's say, which is just going in there, we've got good road to work with, 3 to 500,000. If it's not great condition and we're just putting 1.5 inches on top, trying to restore a ride surface, 5 to 750,000 a mile. To do something like we did out in Route 2, which is a reclaim, which isn't even a reconstruction, that's just trying to reestablish the strength and the uniformity of that sub-base layer. $1 million plus a mile, a full reconstruction, been forever since we've done it, but my guess, let's just say 2 million a mile.
Representative Lally and Representative White. Oh, Representative Lally first.
Oh, me?
It's your birthday for.
Oh.
So you just go whatever you want. You're like vice chair. Just blurt it out.
So great that we avoided total reconstructions. Do we have any roads that might be kind of getting close to teetering into that very
So-
bad territory?
Yeah, so we have a lot of roads that we could do a reconstruction and we could justify it on. We just don't have the money, so we do a reclaim on it and try to establish that structure in the top 15 inches, let's say, as opposed to going down and establishing a whole new drainage piece. We do try to improve the drainage when we do that, so it's not a total Band-Aid. But I'm sure, you know, if money was not an object, we could say, okay, this road absolutely just needs to be reconstructed because the soils underneath are not free draining anymore. We're not getting to an adequate frost depth, which is 50 plus inches. So yeah, we've got a lot of that. We just don't select it as a treatment because it's prohibitively expensive.
Can I ask another question? You know, given our flooding issues, so many parts of the state, I'm kind of wondering about the cost benefit of, in those instances, I know it depends on the hydrology in the specific context, but are there instances where looking at how we help our municipalities become more resilient to flooding, it might make sense to help finance them, their being able to pave certain portions of the road as a flood mitigation solution or water quality or something like that. You know, you have these ancillary costs that come with that, and I'm just wondering if we need like more tools, and if that is something that is this the kind of, presumably some of this direction happens in the Better Roads program and things like that, but.
Exactly. So if paving wouldn't be a mitigation for resiliency. I mean, it's just the surface, and the worst paving in the world still accomplishes that. And there's not really any more susceptibility to flooding with bad pavement over good pavement. I mean, you could maybe really go out on the limb and say if there's a bunch of cracks that water might start rilling in there, but not generally.
You see, you know, on dirt roads, you see
Yeah.
certain areas during mud season that are just like hot spots.
Yeah,
You know,
so dirt roads very much so, and that is the Better Roads program. Those are, you know, some of the grants we give out to do just that, right? To establish a crown, right? Because can only talk so well with my hands here, but right, if you can get the water shed and into the ditch line, then it doesn't accumulate. So often our dirt roads are the vertical grade, meaning the pitch along the roadway is more than, say, a 2 to 6% transverse. So if you have a windrow where the grader kind of left a berm on the shoulder, well, that prohibits the water from getting up and getting to the ditch line. So then it runs along the roadway. And that's where you see significant flood damage, right? Because the water can't get off the road. So it just runs along the road. And what can be a small rill, under normal rainstorms, just grows and grows. And before you know it, you're through that hard structure and you're into less consolidated material that just washes out very quickly. And you can lose the road very quickly. And that's where a lot of those best practices and road standards come into play with having stone line ditches, right? So those are armored and resilient in the crown, and you remove any of the shoulder berms.
My apologies, we're gonna have to leave it for a second because I didn't pay attention to the vice chair at the level I should have. But I've been paving roads for ever, 50 years, 80 years, 100 years. How come it's not way better than, how come where's the technology advancements and why isn't it cheaper, easier? Why isn't it easier?
Sure.
I mean, or is it, and you just don't?
Well, so I think it is. We just don't have anything to compare it to. And I tell my staff this, right? So the paving section is lucky because they can learn from their mistakes, whereas the bridge section really doesn't, right? Our bridges are going to last 50 years. None of us are generally going to have a career that long. Whereas, a road, if we get 10 years out of it, we're good. So I don't think you can say we haven't gotten better, because I think we very much have. It's just we've lost what we're comparing it to, right? So if you took a road in 1983 and compared it to a road in 2023, I think it will last longer with our paving technology. The other issue is, as we all know, oil and gas is a commodity, and the refining process has gotten better. So the quality of our asphalt changes over time, right? And that's a whole other science. And we're also introducing RAP, recycled asphalt pavements, from an environmental perspective, which to some degree is less consistent and has more variable in quality. So it's, we are getting better, but it is a changing technology, and it's very difficult to make an apples to apples comparison to demonstrate that.
When you do that 1.5 thick patch job, or whatever you want to call it there, to resurface, how many years do you expect to get out of that? It's 10 years for the full Monty, thing.
No, the full Monty would be much more than that.
Okay.
We would expect 10 years for that from an adequate place. Like, it's still going to get into the poor, maybe even very poor, but it's a serviceable roadway. If we just let a reclaim go, we would probably get, again, totally theorizing, in 20 years you can come back and say I'm wrong, but 20 plus years out of that. Now, what we try to do is come back at a shorter interval, 8 to 10 years, 8 to 12 years, and just do a quick preservation treatment of that at a low cost, 300,000 a mile, in the mindset that we can keep good roads good, and we never get back to that $1 million a mile treatment. So instead of letting it degrade to, $1 million treatment, the life cycle says, just like painting the soffits on your house, don't let it rot. You do the cheap paint job so it doesn't rot, so you don't have to replace the soffit.
I'm good, thank you. Okay. So I remember when Representative McCormick was here, I always talked about this pozzolani.
Yes.
What is that?
So
Are you using?
a pozzolan is for concrete.
Yeah, okay, so.
So we do use pozzolans in concrete for bridges. Yeah,
Okay.
so we do use pozzolans for that. But, and again, if we were to make a rigid pavement, roadway, there would be pozzolans in that concrete as well. But it's not applicable to,
Is it still, are you getting it from Canada?
yeah, some comes from Canada, some comes from the Midwest. and there's various types of pozzolans. Fly ash is maybe what he was referring to, and that's a byproduct of power production. It was originally a waste product. Turns out it
Is
has.
it last one or is it?
Yeah, pozzolans that,
More expensive.
I don't know that it's more expensive, it might be, but it certainly adds life to concrete.
It does.
Yeah.
So, a takeaway, we saw sort of the scorecards for how we're doing and I thought, like right now, we're all doing pretty good. We're in pretty good shape. I love your, saying that, people will decide how their road is based on the road they drive every day.
Right.
But, if you look at the overall estate, we're in pretty good shape, better than we had been some years past, but there's now a worry that if we can't stay on this maintenance piece, they're gonna obviously degrade over time. So, and the maintenance piece, is that primarily the paving budget? That's where, 90% of it happens?
Yes, yeah, certainly maintenance has a role. As I said, water is the enemy, so to the extent that they can maintain ditch lines, clean out culverts, all that for sure. But the majority of those activities, whether it be a preservation treatment or anything like that, that comes out of the paving budget. Yeah.
So if you just looked at the paving budget per year, factoring in inflation, then, if you're going down on that, you're gonna, over time, obviously see more, less than good roads.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, if you're paving less miles per year, sooner or later, you'll see a consequence of that.
And then can you describe what the decision process is? Like, I'm always looking and I saw they did some 116 in South Burlington. I was like, it didn't seem as bad as I thought. And then it was like, but right in town, we got these giant ruts. And now they're doing 2A in that area. And so what's the process?
Sure.
And is it, 2 or 3 year process where you say, we're doing this section of 116 from here to here, this year or next year?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So, and this is something we get asked a lot, this road's so poor, why are you paving this good road, right? Well, and that goes back to the right treatment at the right time and trying to get the most out of the life cycle cost analysis. So we've got a pavement management system that takes all of the scores, and if you go on V-Transparency, you can see each road has a score. So we break it down into tenths of a mile sections. And essentially we put in an anticipated paving budget, and we can play with X amount for preservation, X amount for rehabilitation, X amount for reclaim. And it runs iteration after iteration. I've been told up to 30,000 iterations. And we put in what we want to achieve. And that's our very poor, less than 25%, and our travel weighted average, roughly around 70. And it spits out the nice distribution of what projects we should do, right, based on how fast we think those roads are going to deteriorate. We've got deterioration curves for various road types. And the right treatment at the right time, the cost of that treatment. And we're just constantly sort of refining that, trying to calibrate it. So that's the process. It's not very, how do I say it? It's not something that we just do step by step and go down like, okay, 116's been 15 years since we paved it, it's ready to go, right? It's much more fluid and iterative. The other piece is if we lose a treatment type opportunity, right? So, okay, that preservation is no longer allowable or isn't viable, right? It might have been paved, I'll just take an example, might have been paved in 2024, but for whatever reason, we had to push the project to 2026. Well, now that treatment type may not be viable, we're not gonna do it in 2027. Now we're like, okay, we've lost that treatment type. Now we're gonna suck every bit of life we can out of that road because we know the treatment's gonna be more expensive, right? So that project, because it's lost the opportunity for that treatment, may get pushed 7 to 8 years instead of 1.
Because you're gonna have to invest X amount, you
Right.
guys get a few more years out of it
Right.
before you do that.
So it's all trying to get the efficiency of the total network condition for the dollar spent. And, you know, in simple terms, the best way to do that is to get every ounce of life out of a specific roadway.
And is it similar for other states or New England states? I mean, you guys talk,
We talk, I assume that's generally, like, I mean, we have a good relationship with Maine and New Hampshire. They all have preservation programs, you know, they have some very similar categories. I won't get into how they do that because I don't know, but I assume it's gotta be a similar methodology.
So, so if you were, which would you say has a bigger impact? Would you say trucks on the roads, or would you say wintertime months and frost and?
So on the majority of our roads, right, think secondary roads, and I'll just, non-interstate majority of our roads, Route 12, Route 100, Route 30, pick it. It's probably as much environmental as anything, and just the age of the road. It's not an engineered roadway anymore. It's not free draining anymore. You know, I could do nothing but plow a road and it'll crack in 2 or 3 years on some of those.
any other questions? Go ahead.
How about, well, 22A,
Yep,
that's got a whole pile of clay underneath it.
yep.
Is that what has a lot to do with? I'll be honest with you, on 22A, I think people don't pay attention. I think there's some bad driving going on. But I just know I live in the area, you know, there's a lot of clay going up to it. It's like it's old lake bed.
Exactly.
And so that must create some.
Yeah, it's absolutely a design consideration, right? So there's a couple factors at play there, right? So obviously we hear everybody, the accidents are a problem. It's a narrow, high-speed corridor with a lot of trucks on it. But we can't just build off to the side because, to your point, you've got clay, right? And now you can see it on some roads that we've widened, kind of the shoulder snaps off. So it isn't just as easy as widening the road, right? We've got to create some sort of uniformity there. We've got to create structure and strength if we're going to make the road wider and more forgiving. And really that's the ask. There's nothing inherently dangerous with 22A. What there is there's a lack of forgiveness on 22A for when people are speeding, when people are inattentive. And that's the problem, really. And to fix that is not a small ask.
I saw a couple of videos and it was definitely driver error is what I saw.
Yeah.
So in other words, to go up through 22A to widen it, you have to dig the whole thing up. Then you'd have to put more ballast on the sides to support the.
Yeah, and then we've talked about doing a reclaim where we can put additives in the subbase to give it a little bit more structure and strength. And that gives it a little bit of uniformity. But you know, there's a cost to that, right? So is there a way we can provide the strength without going to that extent?
You'd have to use fabric and stuff.
Absolutely, you know, and
That does that.
I don't even know how many miles, you know, but I think we've got four sections that we've looked at, and, you know, from whatever, it's Orwell all the way up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not an easy just widen the shoulder.
No, I figured with all I build in the area, so I always got my machine and clay and stuff doesn't clean off your bucket or nothing. It's a mess.
Yeah.
A birthday girl?
Be glad it's over.
I will be. Jeremy, I was wondering on Route 7 between, like for Gems and Middlebury, they have those sort of overtaking lanes. Is it, right,
Like the truck lanes?
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, would that be like a kind of more potential cost-effective solution in off 22A? Which is kind of handling some of the,
So, maybe.
yeah,
I'd have to dig into the data. My sense is the majority of the accidents aren't like passenger vehicles trying to pass across. It's a lot of crossing the yellow line, I think, and there's a lot of just driving off the soft shoulder because the shoulder is relatively narrow, a little bit of inattention. You know, there's just no forgiveness there. You get one or two tires off and it just sucks you into the muck. Where we see truck lanes, to use a prime example, is wherever you have those grades, right? And trying to just deconflict the passenger vehicles with the trucks who can't climb the grades quite as fast. That's generally the purpose for those.
there is, yeah.
And I'm guessing the trucks on 22A are going the speed limit. At least, you know, they're not slowing down.
Yeah, I have yet to hear too many people complain about trucks going too slow. And that's not a frequent.
So sometimes you.
It is, and it's flat, right? It's the basin, right? And that's why the soils are garbage too.
Right, okay. Guess you're driving to the Champlain Valley.
Right.
Are there any other questions for?
Can I ask one last question? Do you think, are drones helpful just in your analysis of like, you know, to get a sense of the big picture? Are you guys using drones for that?
Yeah, for sure. We've got a handful of drones. Obviously the aviation section has a whole UAS team. We've got a couple within highways. We're honestly trying to figure out exactly how best to use them. The things we use them most for right now is anytime there's a flood, right? We can kind of look at and we can use LiDAR to survey the area. But the team that uses probably the most is our geotechnical section with inspecting ledges. Because, you know, it's very expensive to put somebody on ropes and get up there. And so we can get up there and both measure it and take pictures. Nationally, a lot of people are using it. If you're building a new road, trying to get, do some volumetric calculations. So I won't say it's a new technology, but it's a technology where people are still finding new uses for how to use them.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah, Casey.
Just onto the drone thing, do you use them for checking out bridge embankments after there's like a flood?
So we don't use them after the flood. Where we use them though is just some of the standard, some of the higher, longer bridges. We've used it sparingly for that.
Yeah.
Haven't dove in 2 feet yet. Because there is some, it's complicated to fly a drone in and around structures.
Yeah.
And they're not cheap. So we're just making sure we're using them for the right purposes. But we've definitely used them for that, and our consultants have helped us with that, the usage. And nationally, some people are doing it, and it's really for those really big structures that are high up that are difficult to get to.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Expertise. So we are on again at 9.